Welcome back to the IndeVets Happy Hour podcast. I'm here, your host, Andrew Heller, DVM, with my co-host, as usual, Marisa Brunetti.
VMD.
VMD is
Thanks,
right.
Daggers.
We've got our dogs here today. We've got Dagny Roo in the house, and we've got Lois. What's her middle name?
Lois Lane.
Lois Lane. Forgot, yes.
Today we're drinking local beers. That we have a couple new local beers that we're drinking. I'm drinking one from Pittston, PA, called Cloudy and Cumbersome. And
I've got a Delco lager.
That shout out to Michaela.
Delco. Today we have the beginning of a whole new series of podcasts that we're going to be doing for the next, I'd say, 5 or 6 podcasts. To introduce our new summer series, Marisa, tell us what we're going to be calling this thing.
Obviously, as the summer starts, we in vet med become even busier, if we can even imagine that. But the summer is ripe with horrible things that can happen to your pet. So we decided to launch a 6-episode summer series that I'm calling affectionately Hot Pet Summer.
Not to be confused with the movie. What's the
No,
movie?
not to be confused with Hot Girl Summer.
What's that?
What? Oh my God.
I really don't know. We might have
Keep
to cut
this
that.
in, Ross.
Oh gosh.
Keep this in.
What is Hot Girl Summer?
Oh my God.
Is that a movie?
Andrew is old. Andrew's
I really
over
am.
40 now.
I'm Gen X, I think.
Yeah, no, you're old.
Yeah.
That's really what we're saying. So anyway, Hot Pet Summer. And we have a couple topics I'm going to go over. Today, our first topic to intro this is heat stroke. And our goal for these summer series is that we'll have 2 audiences. Pet owners, so even if you're not a vet, you can listen in on this and get some sweet tips. And then veterinarians and other staff members in hospitals. So you'll still be able to get some really great tips.
We're going to get
medicine.
clinical here. We're going to get clinical.
Yeah, we're going to get clinical. So heat stroke, episode number 1, toxic plants, not just for veterinary school anymore. 3 is surviving July 4th. And that's fireworks and how to make your dog more comfortable, as well as avoiding corn cobs. That was a good one. 4th is atopy and other seasonal allergies, the itchy dog and cat, which we see a ton of. 5th, gross parasites and how to avoid them, not only on your pet, but in your house. It's very important. And then lastly, we're doing a big one called outdoor first aid. Basically, we're taking our pets with us more places. And so what can you bring on your hikes or to the beach to keep your pet safe? And what do you do if something does happen while you're out there?
And this episode is intended for veterinary professionals who are going to be seeing more cases of heat stroke in the summertime. And whether you're an emergency doctor who just needs to hear this for the beginning of the season, or you're a general practitioner who has some new clients, they don't know where to bring their pets, you're going to know what to do, at least at the beginning, and most likely be shipping off to ER hospitals for sure.
Yeah. So to start us out, let's talk about what some of the causes are of heat stroke.
So the real cause is heat.
An excessive amount of heat.
An excessive amount of heat, right. There's certainly some predisposing factors. So I think breed is certainly a big predisposition. The brachycephalic breeds, for all you lay people out there, that means the squishy-faced dogs like bulldogs and boxers, Pekingese. There's also the breeds that have really thick coats that really shouldn't be in warm weather climates, like Akitas.
Yeah, Arctic breeds, Nordic breeds.
Yeah, the Siberian Husky that everybody in the South loves to have.
Yes. There were a ton of Huskies in Texas when I worked there.
There are certain medical conditions, too, that predispose pets to heat stroke, and that could be laryngeal paralysis. A lot of labs out there. Obesity, which is certainly an epidemic in our pet community, and we all know that. Cardiovascular disease, certainly another one of the big ones. And then, of course, dogs on particular medications.
Yeah.
There aren't too many that I came up with, but one was Lasix, because they're dehydrated to begin with.
Right.
And then phenothiazines like acepromazine. I don't think most pets are going to be on that, but certainly like if your vet gives you acepromazine to give your dog before they're coming in and they're in a hot car, that could certainly exacerbate the heat stroke.
Mostly for its vasodilation properties, correct, is my guess. Obviously, we talk about heat stroke, and there's really 2 types of heat stroke, right? It's like non-exertional heat stroke. So that's when you unfortunately leave your dog in a hot car or they're in a humid environment, or exertional heat stroke, because we can't forget the working dogs that have strenuous exercise, or my crazy dog who would probably run around in 100-degree weather and exert herself too much.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And as the summer goes on, we're going to see more and more of the high humidity.
Yeah, especially up here.
Once it reaches over 80% humidity, it becomes really difficult for dogs to, expel some of that heat through panting. And so those dogs that already have issues, those brachycephalic breeds, that's when things get bad really quickly. So yeah, leaving them in the car is obviously something that you just alluded to. What else? What other things? You said exertional.
Like I said, we're taking our dogs more places. So beaches, if you don't have an umbrella, I may like to get tan, but my dog doesn't. So I'm making sure that you have what you need when you go to the beach with them. Make sure that you're giving them plenty of water and rests on hikes that you go on.
I know I've seen some heat stroke cases of people who leave their dogs just outside in the backyard. And it's obviously not nice to do, but people do. They run out of water, they get dehydrated, they're in the sun, they don't have proper shade. Certainly on those really hot days, that's certainly
an issue. So what exactly is heat stroke? Like, what is happening in the body when your body gets overheated or the animal's body gets overheated?
So we all know that dogs don't really sweat. I mean, they lose a little bit of sweat through their paws, but for the most part, they can't sweat to release heat. So they pant. Obviously, we just talked about some cases where no matter how much panting they do, it's just that they're in a hot environment. They can't give off that heat. So their core temperature rises to the point where their body systems, which are designed to live in a certain range
of temps,
the proteins in their body start to denature actually, and they stop working properly. So once they hit 104 degrees, that's when some of these signs are going to start to come about. That's, I'd say an early case. As soon as they hit 109, they can really get some severe organ damage. Obviously, the prognosis is going to get way worse. And I even read as high as 120 degrees.
Wow.
Would result in pretty quick death.
Yeah, I've never seen
I've
that.
never seen that either.
What's the highest temperature you've ever seen in a dog?
I think like 108.
Yeah, mine was 109.5.
Wow.
Yeah, that dog lived.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what I learned in researching this topic is we actually have dogs. I say we, but dogs and us. I'm assuming we have these heat shock proteins that get upregulated when the body core temperature rises. So as the temperature rises, it can also affect those proteins as well. So they're going to kick in at the beginning, but then the hotter the dog gets, those proteins themselves will denature and then not work. Which is also really interesting because once they've had heat stroke once in their life, even if they survive it, it's permanently affected their thermoregulation to the point that they're going to now be even more predisposed to getting heat stroke again. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point for especially working dogs, right? Like you hope if the dog is left in the car once that it doesn't happen again. But working dogs who are always out in the heat, this is going to be more, they're going to be predisposed to it more if they get it one time. So that's interesting.
Physiologically, their body's going through this protein denaturation or dysregulation. What is happening in the organ systems at this point?
So when I was a new vet, I remember learning about heat stroke and thinking like, how is this possible? Like all these organ systems are just failing. And so as your temperature rises and these proteins get dysregulated, the body can't work. So your system starts shutting down. The most common ones, the things that we see the soonest and the earliest in heat stroke are affects the organs such like the kidneys, right? So you'll see a lot of acute kidney injury. You also see some organ fit like neurologic issues, vascular system. You can get blood clots. Some systems are worse than others, obviously, and would lead to a poor prognosis. But also something that I always forget about is that the GI mucosa breaks down with the higher temperatures, and then you can get bacterial translocation, which can lead to sepsis. And then you're talking about even worse prognosis. So this is basically affecting every organ system, but probably the earliest one you see is the kidney.
So obviously those systems in mind are going to affect how we treat these pets. And, let's talk about some of the things that the pet parent at home, if they come home and their dog is obviously in heat stroke or they think their dog is in heat stroke, what are some of the signs actually of heat stroke?
When we see it normally, and pet owners can look at this too, is, get comfortable lifting the lip of your dog for a number of reasons, right? You want to look at their gums. And in heat stroke a lot, you're going to see these injected red mucous membranes. If they're further along in heat stroke, obviously their mucous membranes can look different, pale and muddy. But in the beginning, they're going to look red and injected. the dog is going to be panting, possibly having difficulty breathing, not wanting to go anywhere, being pretty lethargic.
Yeah.
So if you see any of those things, in conjunction with it being a very hot situation, like I would get your dog directly to the veterinarian.
Right.
Ideally an emergency room, but your GP can start life-saving measures as well.
So if you think this is an issue, obviously you want to cool down your pet as quickly as possible, but you don't want to put ice on them.
No
right?
Ice baths.
No ice baths, but you can certainly get them wet with cool water. Maybe get a wet towel, put the towel over the pet, put the air conditioning on, obviously if it's not already on, get a fan blowing on the dog, and that will really cool off at least the external parts of the pet.
If you do have some isopropyl alcohol lying around in your house, you can apply it to like their paw pads or the tips of their ears to encourage heat loss outside the body that way, and then get them to the vet. And typically the vet is going to continue those things after evaluating the dog and pulling some blood to make sure the organ function is normal. But we're also going to put room temperature IV fluids in them to start to get the rest of the body cooled down internally.
We don't want to put anything too cold on the pet because it causes vasoconstriction, which then traps heat inside the animal.
Yeah, cold water enemas and gastric lavage are not recommended.
Let's talk about IV fluids.
Okay.
So what kind of fluids are you going to use, number one?
My first go-to would be to go to crystalloids. Everyone has them. And you can get an IV catheter going pretty quickly and get those in. Obviously, if you're having other derangements, which we're going to talk about, you may want to use colloids if you have protein derangements, especially if there's protein loss in the gut. If this is a little bit later in the process,
right.
You're going to use colloids if you have them available.
And antibiotics as well because of that sepsis that could be setting in through the GI.
Yep. When I remember first learning about this, because that wouldn't be my first thought, treating a dog with heat stroke.
Yeah.
But it's a really good point, especially if it's later in the process. And then obviously, if your PT and your PTT are prolonged, which you can see in heat stroke cases, thrombocytopenia, then if you have blood products, especially plasma, you're probably going to use those.
And then there's certain drugs that you would think might help, like anti-inflammatories, but don't use them. Right.
So yeah, what are some things that you shouldn't use?
So we shouldn't use NSAIDs because of that renal component that we're talking about. The kidneys are one of the first organ systems to start shutting down. So we certainly want to avoid that. And they're most likely dehydrated at the same time. Even though we're giving them fluids, we still want to stay away from that. Steroids, another thing we want to stay away from. Yes, for the renal component, but mostly because of the sepsis.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we're not helping the infections
proliferate.
And then alpha 2s, which you really wouldn't think about, but again, the vasoconstriction component of them
would trap the heat. Good point. So what sort of diagnostics do you recommend doing when a dog comes in to see you, in your general practice with heat stroke, after you look at the dog, of course?
So in a GP setting, we all have the ability to check chemistry. So we want to look at the chemistry, we want to look at the kidney values, basically just the organ systems in general. A CBC wouldn't hurt either. We want to see if there's anemia already.
With
thrombocytopenia. But a blood smear might be a better emergency test to do.
True.
And you can actually see nucleated red blood cells. And this could really signify a deeper injury in the bone marrow, which could certainly be a little bit more of a poor prognosis.
It's interesting. I didn't know that.
Supposedly 60% of heat stroke cases have that.
And then, of course, clotting times, if you do have that ability to look at PT, PTT, which not all of us do in GP. And I would say if you don't have the ability to check a chemistry or do clotting times, and you've already initiated cooling mechanisms, maybe put a catheter in, given a bolus, I would get that dog to the closest ER if you can. If you can't, obviously you're going to do the best with what you have. But ideally, we want to know what we're dealing with.
And also, we talked about anytime you give fluids, you want to check the electrolytes, at least to begin with, and probably check them every day going forward, especially in the emergency room, probably more than once a day.
Yeah.
So the prognosis, as we all know, depends. It depends on the prolonged duration of exposure to the heat. Depends on what they presented as. If they were in a coma or if they were pretty alert at the time, I think makes a difference. What are some other things?
So some studies have shown that if the dog presents hypoglycemic already and has a prolonged PT-PTT, and of course, if they've already developed DIC within 24 hours of admission, acute renal failure, and coma, like you mentioned, those are all poor prognostic indicators. And Actually, a lot of studies that I was looking at showed that like the published mortality rates range from like 50 to 56%. So it's pretty high.
Yeah.
So
it's not a good one.
It's not a good
I would
one.
even say anecdotally, I remember these can go either way, right? When they come in really bad, not only is a discussion of prognosis, it's also like, hey, we might have to spend $10,000 to save your pet.
Right.
And I bet you that has to do, that definitely
of
affects the prognosis as well. It's just,
Yeah.
whether or not people can afford these things.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So this whole time, obviously, I was thinking of dogs, right? That's all I've ever seen is dogs. But I really wanted to look into, does this happen to cats? And I'm kind of laughing because it doesn't happen very often to cats. But the times that it's been published have been when cats are stuck in the dryer.
Oh, it's horrible.
Have you seen that? I've never seen that.
I've seen a cat that was in a dryer. Secondly, I literally check the dryer multiple times to make sure there's no cat in the dryer.
That's so
before
funny.
I put.
Do your cats go in there?
No, never.
But you
once.
just do it because it's
yep.
it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
it makes sense that they would get heat stroke from that.
Well, I think the pearls for treating cats with hyperthermia are very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. And we obviously talked about how the cost can get pretty expensive for treating this. But a few things that I would take as a pet owner, number one, from this is know where your dog is. And if you even think they could have heat stroke, take them in. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about, the longer they go with it, the worse the prognosis. So we're very used to hearing people call about this, and we do want you to bring your pets in.
I know that personally, I don't take my dog for walks in the summertime in the middle of the day at all. I wait either early in the morning or when the sun is down in the evenings, because I know, like, I can see my dog's panting heavily, mm-hmm. and she's not an Arctic breed, but
she's something.
She's a Florida girl, actually, so she should be able to handle the heat. But
yeah, but also I always tell pet owners, invest in a very cheap thermometer, because if your dog is really being affected by heat stroke, you can easily put a thermometer, in their anus and get a temp and know. If anything.
We should tell them what a normal temperature is.
Correct.
For a dog.
99 to 102.5, but I would say anything over 103.5 and you're concerned about it, I would take them right in. So that's pretty easy to do.
Well, at the very least, get them inside, cool them off in the ways that we described, and check the lip, like you said, check the gums.
Yep. And how about for GP vets? What's the key? What are the key takeaways?
I think if the temperature is above 107, that's like quick ship off. Do the emergency things that you can do and get that dog away.
Your dog is staring at you.
What is it, Dagny? Can you sit? You want to let her out? Should we let her out?
Producer Ross has got it.
Go outside.
So yeah, I agree. Maybe over 107, but anything over 104, I would obviously initiate cooling mechanisms again, get an IV catheter in, start some crystalloids, get some blood, and see where you're at. It's hard, I think, if you're a young vet listening to this. I remember learning to be a great vet. I always wanted things like fixed instantaneously, but this is one of those things where it could be a waiting game.
Oh, and the pet's going to be in the hospital for days with this. It's not one of those, hey, let's keep them overnight. So if you are giving estimates out to your clients for something like this, I would make sure you pad it, because things can get bad, especially if you start throwing in blood products. It gets very expensive. You're redoing blood work several times a day. Yep. It's intensive. It's intensive care.
It is.
It's an ICU visit, really. And we all know those are $5,000 plus, easy to begin with.
Yeah. So yeah,
get pet insurance.
Oh yeah, we should plug that every time.
Yes. Well, I knew this before, investigating this particular topic, but because I've seen dogs sitting in Teslas, okay, and the screen comes on and it says, "Don't worry, my owner will be back soon," and it says the temperature of the inside of the car, so it actually cools the car with air conditioning while the car is off. Oh, just for the dog. So you put it in dog mode.
Wow,
isn't that cool?
Well, I know you really wanted a Tesla.
I know. Now I have to get one. Now I have to get one.
Now I really need to get one. So very, very cool. I love that.
So that about wraps up our first session of our hot pet summer.
Woo!
Yeah, heat stroke, check. So thank you everybody for listening to this. As general practitioners, we really don't get to see these things every day. And when we do, it's obviously the summertime. So we hope this review gets you thinking and more prepared for what you will likely, but hopefully not, have to treat this summer. Heat stroke cases should definitely be sent to the ER if possible, even if it's just for monitoring in less severe cases. So thanks for listening. You can find us every 1st and 15th of the month on your favorite platforms where podcasts are found. And please subscribe, leave us comments, reviews as usual. Cheers.
Cheers.